This video goes over the Pythagorean Theorem. Okay? It's Pythagorean. So if you put those all together, Pythagorean. It takes some practice to be able to say this. It's harder to say it than it is to actually do it. Okay, so the Pythagorean Theorem sounds a little Greek, which it actually is. Right? Pythagoras was a famous Greek philosopher and mathematician. He is attributed to proving this theorem, the Pythagorean Theorem, but he may not have. There's a lot of question as to whether or not he really was the mathematician that people say he was. And he contributed a lot to our understanding of angles, triangles, areas, proportions, polygons, and polyhedra. And if you don't know what that is, it's a good Google word for you. Okay? He also related a lot of music to mathematics because he was a harp player. And he figured out that if you cut the string in half, it sounded great. If you cut it in thirds, it sounded great. So just all sorts of different things. But that's not what this video is really about. Right? So what does it have to do with math? Well, if we look at a right triangle, right, we have the legs, A and B. The legs are the ones that are next to your right angle. And then we have C, which is our hypotenuse. If we take the length of our legs, you can kind of see some marks on here. So our length of A is 3, and our length of B is 4. And if we take that and we make them into squares, okay, so I have a square of side 3 and 3 off of A, and I have a square of length 4 and 4 off of B. And we add those two areas up, then we get the area of the square off of the hypotenuse, or C. Okay? And this is a length of 5 by 5 for this square. So if we shade these in so that the A sides are blue and the B sides are green, okay, we can see that these two areas add up. There are 9 blue squares on each, and there are 16 green squares on each. So our Pythagorean theorem says that our hypotenuse squared, or C squared, is equal to A squared plus B squared. Huh? What was that? Well, let's see. The Pythagorean theorem says that the sum of the squares of the legs is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. Okay, well, what does that mean? It means A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A and B are your legs, so the sum of the square of the legs is equal to C, your hypotenuse, squared. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This is one you really just need to memorize. Okay? We're going to use this in order to find our missing sides or to see if it's going to be a right triangle. Okay? This only works, your Pythagorean theorem only works for right triangles. And the other triangle, A squared plus B squared, does not equal C squared. Okay, so let's see this in action. So for your first one, we have 5 and 12. Those are your legs. They're the ones that are right next to your right angle. So A is 5, B is 12, C is unknown. And if you switched 5 and 12, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to write down our Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And we're going to substitute in 5 and 12. Okay, don't know what C is, so it's just going to stay as C. 5 squared is 5 times 5, which is 25. 12 squared is 12 times 12, which is 144. Add those together, we get 169 is equal to C squared. We're going to take the square root of both sides, because we just want C, we don't want C squared. So the square root of 169 is 13. Okay? So the length of our hypotenuse here is 13 inches. All right, so here's our second example. We have a right triangle. This time we know our hypotenuse, C, which is 24 centimeters, and we know one of our legs, A or B, which is 18 centimeters. Okay. We're using our Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Substitute it all in. 18 squared and 24 squared is 324 and 576. We have to get B squared by itself. So we're going to subtract 324 from both sides. And we get that B squared is 252. Take the square root of both sides. And we end up, now we have to round, but that B is equal to 15.87 centimeters. Or we could also round it to 15.9 centimeters, depending on what the problem was. So we can find the length on a coordinate plane. So if we're trying to find the length of this black line on here, from -1, up to 2, 4, and we're going to do that by making it into a right triangle. So we're going to drop a side down and we're going to draw a side across. And then we count those lengths. So the length across our bottom is 3 units and the length up our side is 5 units. And now if we went straight down and straight across, you have a right triangle. And so we can use our Pythagorean theorem in order to figure out what that length is. Okay? So A is 3, B is 5, C is unknown. Press pause, see if you can finish this problem. Okay, so A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's the Pythagorean theorem. A is 3, B is 5, C is unknown. Square them, 3 times 3 is 9, 5 times 5 is 25. Add them together and we get 34 is equal to C squared. And then we take the square root of both sides, and so we get 5.8 units. Okay? If you didn't get that, please make sure that you ask questions before you go on for the next one. Okay? And here's your check for understanding. Okay? You have 2 right triangles over on the left. The first one, you're trying to find your hypotenuse. The second one on the bottom, you're trying to find one of your legs. And then your graph, you're trying to find the length of that, which is going to end up being your hypotenuse.